Good Saturday morning of the fifth week. Okay, I just said very brief. In the Acts of the Apostles, it's the spreading of the gospel. Now moving into Macedonia, from Macedonia into Greece, and Greece into Rome. But the gospel is interesting today in John because he shows you there's a price to be paid. With the friendship of Christ, you may also fill up those things wanting in the suffering of Christ. How? By human suffering, by persecution. Watch what John says. This must be, I don't know when he wrote it, 90 AD or later, I don't know. But by then, the Christians are getting their brains knocked out, to use my expression from the street. Okay, they're getting their brains knocked out. They're getting martyred. Okay? And John has to assure them through the preaching of Christ, by Christ's words, that they are suffering with Christ because he suffered first. We are conjoining him in the great adventure of Good Friday. He doesn't use that word, I did it, but watch him say it. He said, Jesus said to his disciples, if the world hates you, realize that it hated me first. No kidding. If you belong to the world would love its own. But because you do not belong to the world, and I have chosen you out of the world hates you. By the way, very, very important. The world he's referring to is all the counterforces to the gospel. He does not mean the earth, Mother Earth. That was so misunderstood for centuries. Even in monasticism, a flight from the earth. They used to say, fuga mundi, flee the world. Which world? It means flee the created world. Fuga mundi means flee the forces of evil in the world. That's what the world means, and that is contrasted to the gospel. Okay? You got to understand that, or else it looks like he's anti-terrestrian. He's anti-world, anti-beauty, anti-everything natural, including the human body. That's false. Misunderstood for centuries, and especially in religious life, but then preached from the gospel. Instead of having an intimate love for the earth and a love for life and the rest of your life, love for one's own body, one's emotions, one's sexuality, turns it into a monster because of this misreading of this text. The world are the forces of darkness. That's what he means by it. John is speaking allegorically. He's not speaking literally. It's allegorical. The forces at work against the gospel. That's what he's talking about. He said, if you belong to the works of darkness would love its own. But because you do not belong to the world, you don't belong to that darkness. Okay? Okay? And I've chosen you out of that darkness. The world hates you. The world, meaning the forces of evil, hate the gospel. It's the great counterforce to the demonic. You want to know the word for the word demonic? The forces of division and hatred versus love. If they persecuted me, remember the word I spoke to you. No slave is greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. By John's time, I don't know if he meant by that the Romans or even the Jews. I don't know. It was the forces against the gospel, the counterforce, the darkness versus the light. Okay? If they kept my word, they will also keep yours. And they will do all these things to you on account of my name, because they do not know the one who sent me. The rejection of Christ. In the rejection of Christ, they will fight against the church. It won't just be that they will ignore the church and walk away. They will fight the church. They'll fight the wisdom of the cross. I think this is true. It's also historically true. In the 20th century, we saw that in Europe. The counter forces, the most evil forces came out of Germany, actually, and Italy and Germany, two immensely Christian countries. More Protestant than Catholic in North, but still, Hitler was a Catholic. But once he didn't not only became messianic himself, he chose the darkness. He attacked the light. So the clergy, the church got attacked too. Not like the Jews, whereby many, many priests went to the death chambers, went to the gas chambers. The counter voices. There's a profound antagonism between darkness and light. And that's the truth. And I think of the 20th century, I see, whatever it's worth here, I'm not a pessimist, I'm an Italian realist. What I see See, the more and more we secularize our own society, American society, I think the church is going to be thrown into a martyred position. She's going to take a beating. I had that at Mass this morning and said that. Not looking forward to it, but the church thrives best when she is, and where the apostles were, on the edge, getting the crap kicked out of them at times, okay? Because she can't become complacent with the culture. She's got to preach to the culture, redeeming the culture, sometimes against its own self-interest, in other words, against its own wishes. You have to proclaim the gospel whether you want to or not. And often it is rejected as a counterforce to the prevailing wisdom. You're seeing the prevailing wisdom, which may be awesomely dark. See? The church is always best when she's uncomfortable, when she is like the apostles going through new land, a land that is foreign to itself. Right? She created a marvelous culture, but co-created a marvelous culture. But even in that, you've got to see that it led to her own corruption in many ways. She helped create the Renaissance, and yet she was corrupted by the Renaissance. The popes of the Renaissance were really, really corrupt, you see. The church is always better off when she's on her heels, when she has to proclaim the gospel and there's nothing in it for her, as a sense of, she's not comfortable in it. But when she says, I got to preach what I got to preach, I got to say what I got to say. I mean, when St. Peter's on trial, what's he say? Look, you can say what you want. I got to say what I got to say. You can try to shut me up. I'm going to still preach it. I'm going back out in the street. I got to preach it. There was a book by a Passionist about my order. I think Cassian Newhouse wrote it. It's called Compelled to Speak. I think that was the title. It was something like that, Compelled to Speak. We're called to speak the gospel, whether you're clergy or lay. It doesn't make any difference. We're called to proclaim the gospel. Whether you're the Pope, husband, wife, it doesn't make any difference. We are called through the faith to proclaim the gospel, first to our families, to the world, and especially when it's rejected. We've got to be willing to live with rejection. The discomfort of not being liked, not wanting our words heard. See? We're compelled by the light of the truth to proclaim that truth. We're not free to hide it under a bushel. We're not. But that's true of any form of wisdom. I don't care whether it's religious wisdom or not. Once you know the truth, you're compelled to speak it. Sometimes very, very uncomfortably. How many times did you have to tell your spouse, no? Or tell your children, no, you can't do that. I won't allow it. I won't allow it. Why? You're going to hurt yourself, or you're going to hurt someone else. How many times? You probably said it hundreds of times over and over, where you had to say the truth when it was uncomfortable, to your family, to your friends, the work you do, whatever. Well, you have to say, no, that's not an A paper, it's a C paper. Come on, you can do better. Or you got that wrong. You got that wrong. You see? We're called to tell the truth. When we see the truth, we are compelled to speak it. See? And that's the gospel. Those of us who are Christians are compelled by the gospel to preach the wisdom of the gospel to the world, the salvation through Christ. Whether the world wants to hear it or not is irrelevant. But we have to live it as well as preach it. What we never want to do is preach the word and be a scandal to it by living a life that is a life of darkness. We have to live the light as well as preach the light. That's the truth. When I think of how so many have left the church, I wonder how many of us drove them away by how we lived, not by what we said. I think of myself in those terms, the clergy, myself. We have to answer for that if we drove them away. By not shedding the light or by speaking the light, but living the darkness.